watched the speech or if you've seen it online since. But Kamala Harris, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, doesn't matter. I mean, she was just a rock star. When my two granddaughters happened to be spending the weekend with us, and one is 7 and one is 9. And they came into the family room, left a child's movie Lion King in one room, and came in to sit with me because they wanted to hear and see this woman who had won the vice presidency of the country. They were just blown away. Neither of them were alive when I was governor. So they have had no experience day to day with how hard it is and what the challenges are for a woman to be in the big arena with the giant slayers, the men of America. And so when Kamala looked into the television lens and she said, I may be the first, but I'm certainly not going to be the last. And I want you to dream big dreams and know that America offers you those opportunities. One of my children had tears rolling down her face. I hope that you all, if you haven't seen it, will take time to read and listen to what she had to say about the fact that her mother was an immigrant and that the things that she has conquered to become vice president of the United States. I love Joe Biden. He's my friend. So he will be a wonderful president. I know Donald Trump, I would give him the same respect as I have done before with Republican presidents. But for her, a woman, to be there representing you all, not just girls and college women, but you guys too, because what she says is that regardless of who you are and how you prepare yourself with an education and with a bit of audacity, you can be whatever you want to be. So that's how I felt when I ran for lieutenant governor. When I was in the Senate, I did several years of politics. I did it the hard way. I did it in the General Assembly first, which is the building blocks to become an executive officer. And then I ran for lieutenant governor. I never had a doubt that I could run and win and that I would be great and that I could solve the problems. But the whole time in the back of my mind, I knew that I was doing it because I came from a really poor family. Neither of my parents had a high school diploma. And here I was, a coal miner's daughter from Southwest Virginia, conquering that glass ceiling in North Carolina. It's not even where I was born. I didn't have the Carolina Network to help support me. So it says to a lot of you all, I hope, that in this state and in this country, dream those big audacious dreams and go for it. There is no reason you can't be whatever you want to be if you work hard. That's how I felt. I was delighted to be the first woman, but I certainly hope I'm not the last, although this was a pretty tough year for women in politics in North Carolina.
Yes, thank you. I know when it came in 2008 and you were elected to governor, I was asking my parents about it. And I was like, what do you mean we haven't had a female governor of North Carolina? This is the first? It's been around for a long time, but I know it means a lot to a lot of people to see women in these positions. So.
It does. You can't see it if you can't be it unless you see it. And I think that's what Kamala said and what I've said all along. I had a little girl come to them. This is one of my anecdotes that I love. I had a rope line the day I was inaugurated of about 3,000 people around the mansion. Folks came from all over the state to have a chance to say hello and congratulations. A lot of men, but a lot of women and little girls too. And at the end of the evening, the highway patrolman told me that we had to shut down the mansion because it was so dark and it was dangerous and the liability was so bad. And so I said, that's fine, we'll shut it down, but I'm going to walk the rope line. I'm going to meet these children who came to Raleigh to see me. And so my family, my 2 sons and my husband bundle up and we go outside. And near the end of the line, there's a little African-American, she was probably 3rd grade girl. And she had no coat on. I'm sure she didn't listen to her mom that morning when her mom said by nightfall, it's going to be cold. And so she was freezing to death, but around her neck, and I have the picture hanging in my office in Raleigh now, the picture was a Christmas box, probably the back of a box that she had hand printed a sign and said, now I know for sure I can be a woman governor too. That's seeing it to be it. It personifies what the experience is all about. And So yeah, thank you for that question. That was an easy one.
Yes, yes. And in keeping with talking about some of the themes of the election, unity and reconciliation have been coming up a lot in this divisive climate. What are some of the things you did as governor or in your other offices to reach across party lines?
You know, the challenge isn't always with your own party. For several years, most of the time that I was in the legislature, the Democrats were in control. I am a Democrat, if y'all haven't figured that out yet. I was elected as a Democrat. And when I was lieutenant governor, the Democrats were in control. Once in a while, a Republican would control the House. But the first 2 years, the Democrats in my party, with Democrats in both the Senate and the House, were much harder than they'd ever been before. And I always thought it was because I was a woman. They really refused to be collaborative. I mean, there just was very little collaboration. So it was dog eat dog, fight to the death. And as much as you could beg them to come aboard, they didn't come. So I learned a little trick that's very devious, but very true. And it worked with the Republicans when they took over for the next 2 years, and they have controlled the majority since then. They gained power in 2010, and as you saw the election results, they've gained much more power in this past election. You have to trade them something. Politics is all about the art of compromise and the art of trade. So when somebody wanted a bridge for their district and I couldn't get their vote on the budget bill, I would tell them that the highway engineer would go to their district and look at the bridge. I couldn't promise a bridge, but we would begin the process if they would vote for the budget. And that sounds crass and really not the best public policy, but that's the way to get things done in a very controversial, divided government. I think that Joe Biden has those skills. He is a product of the Congress. He's been in the Senate forever. He has working relationships with Republicans. You have to have working relationships with everybody, not just the people in your party. And you have to find your players. You find people who are younger. I've always done that. I found freshmen who wanted to be somebody, Catherine, when they'd been there 3 or 4 years. And so I helped make them somebody during those first 2 years by letting them run my legislation. So you begin to build that cadre of support from the newer members, and with the older members, you trade them deals. And it works for the most part, unless it's just an adamant no to block you from being successful. And I have found, for the most part, the House and the Senate in Raleigh, I'm hopeful for it not to happen in Washington, but the House and Senate have been unwilling to work with the current governor, and it's been really hard. And it will be harder this session because with all the money in the world, they spent hundreds of millions of dollars in this race. And to have lost 4 House seats is just sending a bad message to the people who will be in control that the folks of North Carolina really do want a divided government, but there was no message sent about getting things done. So I'm very worried about what will happen in North Carolina and in America during the next 4 years.
Yes, going off of that, so as we all know, some Democrats were able to win statewide office in North Carolina this year, like Roy Cooper, but others were not, and a Republican likely secured North Carolina's electoral votes. So how do you think that disparity plays out, where one's going one way and one's going the other way?
Well, I found when I was lieutenant governor, there was a Republican president. And when I would attend a brief with other lieutenant governors from around the country, there was always a welcoming message, but I never felt like after the fact I had access to the principal, to the incumbent Republican. And I'm saying Republican Democrat just because it's my party, but it would be the same if it were a Democrat. I'm hopeful that with Biden as president and Cooper as governor, that North Carolina will be in the line to have more investment and more opportunity with this administration. I think the last administration with President Trump was very good to North Carolina as well. We got lots of the CARES money, which was from COVID. There was lots of opportunity initially where he was very conciliatory and collaborative with North Carolina until the political climate heated up and then it became adversarial again. So I think the first 2 years is always the easiest. And let's hope for the best for North Carolina and America during the first 2 years of this administration, be it the governor or the president.
That makes sense. Thank you. So I'm going to ask one more question and then I'm going to let some of y'all jump in. So go ahead and start thinking about what you might want to ask. And then after we're done with this next question, you start raising your hand in the using the participants tab, and we'll try to get through everyone. So my last question for now is about the current pandemic. So this is probably the ultimate emergency of them all, but every governor has to tackle something unexpected. What were some of the, or an emergency you had to manage as governor, and what were some of the leadership qualities necessary to handle this kind of situation?
The pandemic is a huge, huge challenge for the country as well as the state. When I was governor, I thought I could be the best education governor in the history of North Carolina. And I had great opportunities, I thought, ahead of me to solve the jobs problem and the roads problem all over the state, to bring parity between rural and urban North Carolina, and to really grow job opportunities for all people, and to improve schools for all students, because that's where my heart is, in pre-K through university. I have a PhD in aging and healthcare, so part of me wanted to fix healthcare. I had so many things I wanted to do, but in October before the election, Wachovia, the bank that was headquartered in Winston-Salem, went belly up, and very quickly thereafter, the whole country was at risk. And we faced the biggest economic crisis since the Great Depression. And so rather than doing all the wonderful things that you had hoped to do as governor, you found yourself taping things together with Scotch tape and trading one thing for another thing, but all the choices were bad. There was no golden days for anybody. And you have to learn to live with that. You have to learn to live with adversity and dig deep into your bones and stand up straight and get the job done. And that's what I did. So I think that sometimes adversity brings out the best in a leader. And I believe that for me, the recession allowed me to find skill sets that I didn't even know I had, and to worry about things that I would never have worried about before. One other thing that really happened that stays at the top of my mind, because there's been so many comments about it, is I was on a trip in China. I was out of the country, and the courts ruled that death row inmates, rapists, murderers, all the folks who were, supposed to be on death row, but had been because of North Carolina's prison system at that time, where you could gain years off your sentence if you behaved in prison. It's called good time, gain time. So you gain time when you're good if you're in a prison. And because some of them had gained as many as 5 or 10 years, they were going to be paroled. And there I was in China when I found out 4 rapists and several murderers and all kinds of other really folks who had been adjudicated as guilty. I mean, they were guilty. We're going to be out on the streets of North Carolina. And I talked to the judge. I talked to lawyers all over the state. And they told me that I was going to have to do what the courts had ruled. And I just decided I wasn't going to do it. I said, put me in jail. I'm not letting the prisoners out, put me in jail. And I would have gone to jail the whole 4 years that I was governor. We continued to argue it in court, but they never got out. And I think that was one of the biggest experiences that I was certainly unprepared for initially. But sometimes I say all that to say this, that to succeed in any profession, I think you have to be a risk taker. I think once in a while you have to go with your gut not what folks are telling you the rules are, and make a decision and stick with it. And that's what I did. And I learned a whole lot about standing up and sticking with the decision. So there's all kinds of opportunities to get on the job training, as well as all kinds of opportunities to take your skill set and excel.
Yes, thank you. I definitely remember the financial recession vividly, but I wasn't as familiar with the criminal justice issues. So that was very interesting. Thank you. So, okay. Does anybody want to be the brave one to go first? Okay, Jonathan.
Hi, I have a question about education spending in North Carolina, because I know that you were a former teacher, and you just talked about some of your credentials in education as well. But I went through the North Carolina public school system, so I always heard about how like teacher pay was really low, how North Carolina relatively has little spending on public education. I'd like to know if you have any insight on really why that is, after just from your experience in North Carolina politics, and where you see that going in the future.
Well, I had hoped that it would go forward. Teachers are paid terribly in North Carolina. Right now, they're making about $50,000 on average, which is much better than it was when I was in the General Assembly, and even when I was governor. When I was governor, I can see why the salaries didn't increase, because there was no money to increase anything. And the teachers sucked it up and didn't whine a lot. But now, in times of COVID and in times of the challenges of teaching with technology online, which is what I do in the private sector now. If you want to ask a question about that, I do a lot of ed tech, a lot of virtual, and have been doing it since I left the governor's office. That's my sweet spot, technology. And so I think with all of the demands on educators, that there has to be a knowledge and a commitment to raise teacher pay. There hasn't been that. The General Assembly has raised it a couple of $1,000s a year, or 4,000, I don't know the numbers. But the bottom line is, the most important job in America, if you ask me, is a teacher, whether in a private school or a public school. I applaud you for going to a public school, but that's the hardest job and the most important job in America. They are in effect training the workforce of the 21st century. And to be paid with such a little bit of money, to be treated with no respect, to have no privileges. You know, it's the only profession I can think of in America where there is not the ability to go to the bathroom when you need to go to the bathroom. Teachers can't leave their classroom. So they have to do a whole arena of jobs separate and apart from the education piece. And I think they should be paid for it. I don't know why. There hasn't been a rising tide of parents and students and businesses to demand better pay. But that doesn't seem to be where the heart of North Carolina is in 2020.
I guess another hot topic. I guess you were talking a little bit about like, I guess like trying to work in areas where there is somewhat of a like legislative gridlock, I guess. And like right now we sort of are in this really polarized climate. And I was wondering like what you, like whether you had any insights on how this might play out for specifically the process of like districting and gerrymandering and things like that. Do you have any insights that might, on like ways to gain like bipartisan support for fair districting, or like maybe is that the right question to be asking?
No, it's the really right question, because it's the year, because of the election in 2020, the people who were elected will redraw the districts of North Carolina, and it will become so partisan and so bitter. And I've been there twice during the redrawing as a member of the assembly. And if you have power and control, it's a very hard thing to yield. I thought that the best opportunity that began to take shape early in this election cycle was in getting candidates who were running from all of the parties in North Carolina to commit to the pledge that I would support. As if I were running, if I got elected, I would commit to supporting nonpartisan reformation of the redistricting process. And even with the redistricting commission that's been talked about all over the country. But I didn't see that come to fruition. I didn't hear people talk about it. COVID gave everybody a nice, easy way out, because it's hard to get sassy on a Zoom virtual town hall meeting. And, you know, there's always a way to say, we'll get back to you, blah, blah, blah. And so that didn't happen. And I will be very surprised, David, and I'm just telling the truth. I'll be very surprised if anybody in the General Assembly in power, and it would be the same if the Democrats were in power, but it's the Republicans this time, is willing to cede the authority and the stability they have for their own members to a redistricting nonpartisan commission. Love to see it happen. It should happen, but I don't believe it will happen. And I don't know a way to force that.
Do you think maybe like more awareness campaigns might play a role? I don't know. I've been thinking about like potentially like I'm a Democrat and I have a friend who's a Republican and I have an independent friend, and I think we all support like nonpartisan redistricting.
Right.
I was thinking of seeing if we can like sign a joint letter to some different representatives or something. And I was thinking like beyond that, or like if we have young people doing something like that with all their different representatives across the state, I don't know. I mean, do you think something like that might hit some of these representatives?
I think it would be wonderful for you to do it, whether it worked or not. I don't know that they'll listen. I know that they like every member likes being a member, and they like what comes with being a member in terms of being able to effectively get their issues heard and help move North Carolina forward. So they're happy in their seat. I would love it if there became if there was some kind of organized youth movement to demand a nonpartisan redistricting commission. I don't know this year if you would get it done, but I think if you don't try it, and if one cohort of college students doesn't begin the process, it will never happen. And if you all did it, it might then encourage other students to do it. When I was lieutenant governor, I had an opportunity as I was chair of the Health and Wellness Commission, which was it was created with tobacco money. So I was, and my commission had hundreds, $250, $300 million to invest in North Carolina. And I had a group of people who were willing to take a risk. North Carolina was the #1 tobacco producing state in America at that time. And about a third of the economy of North Carolina was wrapped around tobacco sales. And we started and were very successful in passing a campaign where there could be no tobacco usage in public schools, in any public building, community college, hospital, or university campus. They thought that couldn't be done, but the reason we did it was because we organized students, high school students, at the local level and taught those students. We would bring them to Raleigh and pay their way on a Saturday, hundreds of students, high school kids, and taught them how to lobby. And they would go back to Bertie County or to Orange County or to Wake County, but especially to the rural counties, these high school students. And they would get themselves on the county commissioner's agenda, and they would demand that the school system becomes tobacco free. And if those kids go to 4 or 5 meetings during the winter months of a year and demand that the county commissioners do something, and it's on the local channel, the TV channel that airs the commission meetings, pretty soon there becomes a movement. That was inspired by high school students. So if they can do it, I would think that kind of broad-reaching statewide movement of college students, students or young adults who aren't in college, doesn't have to be a college student, but mobilize, try it. I think it's wonderful. I pray that it happens.
Yeah, thank you for your questions, David. Emma, I saw you have your hand raised. If you like, come off mute.
Yeah, okay. So I guess my question is kind of like, since North Carolina, like especially seen in this election, like there's such a big partisan divide between like the urban parts of the state and the rural parts of the state. Like, how was it like having to govern for people in such different living situations with such different priorities?
It's really hard, Emma. Where I am now, because of COVID, we left our house in Raleigh and moved to the coast. We have a home. My home place is in New Bern. So I'm here in the heart of rural. New Bern is more cosmopolitan, but this is where rural North Carolina is. And in the west, once you're beyond Winston-Salem, all the way to the Georgia-South Carolina line, it's rural North Carolina. And there just seems to be an unconquerable divide between rural and urban. If there were a way to create better jobs, and I have great hope because of what we've learned during COVID with the use of technology, so that companies would be willing to locate in more rural areas because their workers can be anywhere in a high-tech company, then there might be some dissolution of those geographic issues. But right now, they're draconian. There is nothing but tension between very poorly educated, very focused voters with lower incomes and very much religious based, and folks in the Triangle or in Charlotte, the banking capital. It's just a hard nut to crack. I've tried for years, others are trying now. And until we can change the structure of the economy of rural and urban North Carolina, until we can force some jobs that state government has into rural areas, and until we can change the school systems of rural North Carolina so that we can have better public and private schools, so our kids themselves get better educations and can come to Carolina and compete effectively, things won't change. It's really, you've hit on the age-old dilemma as to how you bring a state together. And I've been very unsuccessful. Every leader around has been unsuccessful. And I don't see that this administration, as close as I am to the governor and think he's doing a great job, has made a dent in how to conquer that divide.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Robert has his hand up next.
Hi, so you know, I live in Charlotte and it's a fast growing area, and I know the state is as a whole as well. What things need to be priorities to prepare North Carolina to expand in population? Like, what do we need to take into account as our population grows?
Well, we're going to have a couple of million new people by 2030. And so you've got to look at the infrastructure of North Carolina. And Charlotte is a hub of growth and a financial tech sector. It's a wonderful city. I love Charlotte, but I love Raleigh as well. And it's as growing as Charlotte, and the jobs there are cosmopolitan. The state as a whole is growing. There's a spread of the population growth. A lot of newcomers where I am, and a lot of newcomers in more developed, more settled, more cosmopolitan parts of rural North Carolina, the East and the West. Cashiers, many places in the mountains are retreats for retirees. The problem with many retirees is they don't claim North Carolina as a citizen. They're not a resident, so they don't pay taxes. And so we don't want a summer, come on back is what we call it. They're somewhere else and they come here for the summer, and we don't want those. I mean, we like them, but we don't want 100% of them. We need the tax dollars. I think that you just got to focus on what the basic infrastructure demands. It's unconscionable to me. I've been, before COVID, I was in Europe and riding the fast trains and China and Japan, the trains go 300 miles an hour and they're fun to ride. You can go from here to yonder very quickly. It's unconscionable that in America we don't have some kind of rail, some kind of high-speed rail that will get us from place to place. North Carolina is an island in its own. You know how many people take the train from Raleigh to Charlotte? Very few. And I helped do that. I knew when we were doing it that it would be a hole for money, and that's what it's become. But we've got to look with a different lens at the promise of tomorrow. Technology has helped precipitate that. I think it's unconscionable that, and I worked on Biden's education technology issues for the transition. I think it's unconscionable that there is not total access to broadband in every home and business in America. I think it's just as necessary as electricity and water and sewer. I think it should be called infrastructure. And so I hope you all, as you begin to engage in public policy, as you leave the campus, you'll help make that happen. It's your generation who should be demanding it. You should be able to live anywhere in the country or in North Carolina and be able to compete economically and educationally. And that will be one big thing. The other issue is healthcare. How do you take care of all the new people that are coming? I'm hopeful that the courts aren't going to repeal Obamacare. You know that it went to the Supreme Court today. I'm very hopeful that they won't rule the whole law unconstitutional. About 50 million people would lose their health care the day the decision's handed down if they repeal it all. So it's just basic bread and butter issues, Robert. It doesn't change from one generation to the next. It's just what you have to do as your population grows to support a new generation of North Carolinians. And the old people, don't forget the old people. I'm one of them now. So y'all got to take care of me too.
Thank you.
My dog is barking and I apologize.
Don't worry about it. I see, Hunter, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak to the transition of starting your professional life as a teacher and then moving into the General Assembly and then eventually becoming governor. What exactly did the decision-making process look like for you to leave the classroom and then take on a totally different role?
Well, I think it was random, Hunter. Sometimes you don't plan a career path, or if you plan it. I've already said I have a PhD in gerontology and education. And when I graduated from the University of Florida with that wonderful title, I thought I could go to a university's gerontology center and do research and teaching and change the life for older people in America. And I got waylaid by a decision to move to North Carolina, and there were no such things here. So I had to find a different interest, a different profession. I got into local government and really enjoyed that. I found out that in politics, in local government, I was very young, I'm not a lot older than you all are now. I began to see how things happen, that local county commissioners and school board members and city council really were important on the local level, and they made all the decisions. And I was working for a collaborative of local governments, and so I needed to learn the process. So I left teaching because of the pay. I've forgotten who asked me that question. I was making $21,000 a year. I had 2 children and a husband who was working a little bit, but not a lot. And I needed the income to help support my family. So I had to find something new to do. So that switch from being an educator was unplanned. It was a product of economics that I needed to be able to achieve what I wanted to be able to help my family with. And I found that I loved it. You'll find something that you love to do. I would bet in 10 years that not 50% of you all are doing what your degree says you're going to do when you leave Carolina. You'll find out what your niche is, and you'll figure out a way to game that system to educate yourself, to become very proficient in whatever it is you love. I found along the way that I was spending more time at work. You'll find that if you haven't already, than with my family and my friends. And so if I was going to do that, I needed to do something that I love. And that led me to the politics because I wanted to fix healthcare. And I thought, why am I going to sit here in Eastern North Carolina and whine for the rest of my life? Why don't I just run? And the consultants who managed my campaign at that point in time, I'd never done anything in politics, you all. As a young woman with 2 children and a husband and a house and 2 dogs, I mean, here I was, a babe in the woods. And they said, Bev, you shouldn't tell anybody you're a woman. So none of my campaign material for the first 4 years mentioned that I was a woman. And without the internet, nobody would have known. I mean, those were the days when communication was what you paid it to be. And so I went from the House to the Senate and then just decided to make the plunge. And so as you go through your career gradually, you'll find a conduit, a theme, a tie, a string that helps you weave a blanket of many colors. But that blanket will be yours, and you will excel in whatever you do if you dream those big dreams that Kamala talked about Saturday night.
Thank you. Okay, I see Bennett, you've got your hand raised.
Hello, Bennett.
Hi there. I think you've already touched on it a little, but I was wondering if you could just speak to your election and campaign process, running against Pat McCrory in 2008, because, he was the mayor of Charlotte, a huge urban center.
Yeah, he was the mayor of Charlotte, and I spent a lot of time in Charlotte and beat him in Charlotte, I might add. It was great fun. I love the campaign. I love the whole thing of meeting people and being with folks. You raise money, that's horrible. I've just read, I'm doing a TV program tomorrow on the results of the election in North Carolina. And I was preparing a little bit earlier this afternoon before this call, and was shocked to see that the Senate race between Cunningham and Tillis was the most expensive race in the country, $235 million. That, to me, should be outlawed. I mean, that is a huge, huge amount of money that could be used for all kinds of other things. Back in the day, if you raised $100,000, and when I ran first, it was a lot of money. I was good at money raising. I found out that because I like people, I began to be good at calling and asking if folks would support me. Folks believed in me. They knew I would do what I said I would do, or I would try. And I never made any promises, never made any commitments to anybody, because that's illegal. But I did good public policy. I thought that the races would not continue to escalate. My governor's race was about $8 million for a primary, and maybe 3 or 4 for the general against McCrory. And now that's chump change, you all. The prices are so high. I think the governor might have raised $150 million, which he spread across the caucus in the state to lots of Democratic candidates. But that kind of money is just out of reach for a lot of people in this country. That number scares folks off. And as a result, few people want to run for a couple of reasons. Let me talk about that a minute, if you don't mind, Catherine and Patrick.
Yes, go ahead.
Really, somebody asked me today how we could urge more people to run for office. Well, if I tried to convince one of y'all to run, you might want to run now because you're young and have no ties, no skeleton, so to speak, in your closet that you can't air out. I can remember telling my boys who are in their 40s now, when they were at Carolina, don't ever do things like alcohol excessively, and don't ever smoke pot, because you'll never be able to run for office and get elected. And now they've decriminalized almost everything in Oregon. So everything that I thought was right is now not the right pathway for getting elected. So I think the good advice I can give you is begin to build your contact list. That's something that I think is essential, whatever your profession is. Build that list. Right now, my personal contact list on my iPhone has about 3,500 people in it. And I actually know personally about 3,000 of them. I don't call them all, but there was a day when I began politics where I would call everybody in that Rolodex back then. So that's the one piece of advice I would give you all today, regardless of what you do. Begin to reach out. If you go to a cocktail party or a social, or you're at somebody's house with older people, folks in their 30s and 40s and 50s, meet them and write that down as when you come home, or put it in your phone there. Get to know those people. And once in a while, pick up the phone. And even if you don't need advice, ask for advice. That's the way I think most people today can really excel quickly in any profession. And it isn't bad. It really isn't bad to use those contacts to move your own career forward. It's how most people have done it traditionally, and it's how you will do it. The internet opens up a whole different arena. I would assume that all of y'all are great with Twitter. Even I am fairly good with it. I mean, digital media has changed the world. And so my experiences are defined by the period in which I lived. And you all will figure out new, innovative ways to succeed in your career. I hope it's politics for many of y'all. Please run. Please run. Call me for advice. Please run. We really need good people. And that was the final point I was going to make on this whole area, that in the 21st century, it's really hard to find good people who are willing to be torn raw in a public arena. You saw what happened to Senator Cunningham, to the candidate Cunningham. You saw how he was torn apart, how his family was ripped apart. Maybe he deserved it. I'm not at all on his side about the morality issue, but to have your kids and your wife torn apart because of something you've done to be made fun of, that's really hard. And on a smaller level, it happens in every community because negative politics has become the name of the game. The meaner and uglier you can be about your opponent, the nastier stuff you can do op-ed research and find on them is the way you win. That's bad for America. It's really bad for North Carolina. And I hope that your generation changes that.
Thank you. So we do have time for one or two more questions, but I'll go ahead and ask one. So you had alluded to it earlier, but what are some of the things you've been up to since leaving office in 2013?
I've been pretty busy, really. I went to Harvard for a couple of years and worked there at the Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School and did wonderful things with bright, focused students just like you. And I learned at Harvard that a young man who was getting an MBA, and I asked him if he was going to choose the good and pure career or was he going to make money, because so many of my students were ending up on a CPA business track going to one of the big accounting firms. And he said, you know, Governor, you can do both. And he talked to me about being able to make a lot of money and then reinvest it in doing things for America and reminding me of the philanthropy of the Gates. So that taught me a lesson. I came back and was at your enemy school down the road, Duke, and enjoyed a year there. And all the while I was beginning to build a practice in technology and education. I did lay down fiber in the state, broadband when I was governor. So all the schools are connected. That's why y'all have such a good intranet on your campus and why the universities across the state have that intranet. So because of that, I've had the experience and have a little bit of reputation as being fairly good at that. So I've been in the private sector representing startup companies who are in that arena, trying to figure out a way to package their products so that they benefit students of all ages and healthcare of all sorts. So I've been really busy. I'm about to retire. I've cut my practice down a lot, my client list, because of COVID. And I found that I don't want to travel. I was traveling a lot all over the world and loving it. But there comes a time when I just didn't enjoy going to the airport in Raleigh-Durham anymore. And so I'm glad that this has given me an opportunity to rethink what I want to do with this next stage of my life. I may write a book. I'm thinking about that, Catherine.
I'm sure we all love to read it. So,
oh, well, the biography's coming out. I hope the middle of the winter about my time in politics. But I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm thinking about writing a book. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any more questions for tonight? We've got a little bit of time, so don't leave this meeting regretting not asking something. Okay, I see Jonathan. Got a question?
If it's, I've already asked a question. If it's all right.
It's all right.
All right. So if my research is correct, when you were lieutenant governor and governor, when you were lieutenant governor, the governor was a Democrat as well, and then when you were governor, the lieutenant governor was a Democrat as well. So there wasn't like any split in the party there. But obviously North Carolina just re-elected Roy Cooper, and then there's a Republican lieutenant governor. So I don't know much about like the relationship between the two offices, but how do you foresee that playing out, having a split party on that? And why do you think that North Carolina voters would, the same voters that voted for a Democrat for governor would vote for a Republican for lieutenant governor, and vice versa?
I think that, and I'll just be honest, Jonathan, as I'm trying to do, I get in trouble with that a lot. I believe that the commercials that Dan Forrest paid for showing Mark Robinson as a candidate, he's a great speaker. He's a huge hunk of a guy, if you've seen him, and he's dynamic. I think those commercials help showcase the fact that he was actually, in my opinion, watching the commercials, perhaps a bolder candidate than the gubernatorial candidate. And I think that's why they chose him, because for the first time, a lieutenant governor candidate had an opportunity to have extended media coverage during a campaign. When I was running for lieutenant governor, I had raised maybe $1 million. And I actually, because of my name being Perdue the chicken, we brought a chicken, a stuffed animal chicken, a parody chicken, to the Capitol, and had him running around and said, Perdue's not a chicken, vote for blah, blah, blah. I mean, you did whatever you could do for that 2-week period where you could afford to buy time. Mark didn't have to do that. So I think he is new to politics. He has no resume, no CV at all. I'm going to be interested to watch him. His only constitutional duty is to tend to the Senate, preside over the Senate, and break a tie in case of a tie. So I'm hopeful that he will find other things to do. I'm going to call him in the next 2 or 3 weeks and offer to have a conversation with him, or a Zoom meeting where we can talk. I hope he succeeds, because it's important for that office. You realize, obviously, by the two of them being from different parties, that in North Carolina, one of the few states that does it this way, the governor candidate does not get to pick the lieutenant governor candidate. So they don't run as a ticket. They don't necessarily get along. They don't necessarily cooperate on the same issues. And oftentimes they ignore each other. And that was my experience as lieutenant governor with a Democrat governor. And I'm sorry to say, when I was governor, I wasn't much better with the lieutenant governor that was there. And he was a wonderful, smart guy, because we were all so caught up in one thing, which was the economy. So I'm hopeful for him. And I don't know why the voters did it. I think we the voters are much smarter and thoughtful than people give us credit for being. I found myself this year really thinking through, why do you think the commissioner of education won? I serve on her board. She's head of the governor's school, the Republican that won the race. She's a great woman. The woman who was running as a Democrat, Jen, was a wonderful, smart professor at Greensboro. Why did they pick one over the other? I don't know, because their resumes were wonderful. I don't know what makes people do what they do. If they aren't pulling a straight ticket, they have to know somebody. Y'all, you've been mighty nice. Thank you for inviting me, Catherine. I know people want to go do something else. Thank you all for your time, for this opportunity to listen to North Carolina's finest minds. Again, let me urge you all of you to get into politics. Catherine or Patrick has my email. I'm slow sometimes with it, or I don't usually give out my phone number. They can give you my contact information. If you want me to be added to that huge list, I'm begging you to begin tonight. And if you ever need anything from me, from somebody that you met tonight through this Zoom opportunity, please feel very free. If I can't do it, I won't. But if I can help you in any way with a career choice or a step forward in your pathway, I'll be proud to. Thank you very much, you all. Have a good evening.
Yes, thank you everyone for being here today. Really appreciate it. I know it's exams coming up, but I appreciate how engaged everyone was and all your questions. And thank you, Governor Perdue, for being here tonight.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My dog's going to be